Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where ordinary people step into extraordinary darkness. Tonight we travel to Alaska, a land where the sky burns green and the ground swallows sound. There's something about the endless nights here. The isolation, the storms, the quiet roads that lead nowhere, that breed stories you can't quite shake off. What you're about to hear are real accounts and bone-deep legends from those who survived them, and from some who didn't. Make sure you subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next time the dark calls. Pull up your hood, take a deep breath, because once we start, the cold takes hold, and it's hard to get warm again. Story 1. Signal from Mount Sanford. The rescue team found the wreckage on day 3, but the radio transmissions didn't stop until day 7. My name is David Casper, and I am a former air traffic controller who worked at Anchorage International from 1985 to 2019. What I am about to tell you happened in 1948, but I only learned about it 30 years into my career when I found a file that was never supposed to leave the archives. A file about Northwest Airlines Flight 66 and the 4 days after it crashed when something kept trying to communicate from a mountain where everyone on board was already dead. On March 12, 1948, Flight 66 departed from Shanghai, China, headed for New York with refueling stops in Anchorage and Minneapolis. On board were 30 passengers and 6 crew members. The flight was routine until they hit Alaskan airspace. Weather deteriorated rapidly. Visibility dropped to near zero. Ice formed on the wings faster than the de-icing systems could handle. The pilot, Captain Raymond Sullivan, radioed Anchorage at 1,947 hours requesting emergency vectors to the nearest airfield. That was the last official transmission anyone heard from Flight 66. 3 minutes later, the aircraft slammed into Mount Sanford at 11,000 feet, killing everyone on board instantly. The impact was catastrophic. The plane disintegrated, pieces scattered across a quarter-mile of frozen mountainside. When rescuers finally reached the site, they found no survivors, just wreckage and bodies frozen in the positions they died in. But here is what the official report's done, T mentioned. Here is what I found in that file. Starting on March 15th, 72 hours after the crash, air traffic controllers in Anchorage began receiving radio transmissions on Flight 66's frequency. The transmissions were garbled, barely intelligible, but they were definitely coming from the crash site. And they were definitely using Flight 66's call sign. At first, everyone assumed it was a survivor. Someone had lived through the crash, was trapped in the wreckage, was trying to signal for help. They scrambled rescue teams, sent helicopters back up the mountain despite the dangerous conditions, spent an entire day combing through debris looking for anyone alive. They found nothing. Every single person on that plane was confirmed dead. Many had been dead for days, frozen solid. There was no one alive up there, no one who could be transmitting. Yet the signals continued. Every few hours, the radio would crackle to life. Static, fragments of words, sometimes numbers, sometimes what sounded like coordinates. Always on Flight 66's frequency, always using their call sign. The file I found contained transcripts of those transmissions, 17 of them over 4 days. I've memorized every word. The first one came at 0342 hours on March 15th. The controller on duty, a man named Robert Hayes, noted that the voice sounded wrong, distorted, like someone speaking through water or from very far away. The transmission said, Flight 66 to Anchorage. Altitude descending. Can you read? Hayes responded immediately. Asked for confirmation of survivors. Asked for location details. Asked how many were alive. The response came after a long pause. Just 2 words, repeated 3 times. Still descending. Still descending. Still descending. Then silence. Hayes tried to reestablish contact for an hour but got nothing. He filed a report. Sent teams back to the mountain at first light. They found nothing new, just the same wreckage, the same frozen bodies. No working radio equipment, no power source, nothing that could explain the transmission. The second transmission came that night, 2,218 hours. A different controller, Margaret Chen, was on duty. The voice was clearer this time, but somehow worse. It gave coordinates, precise longitude and latitude. Margaret wrote them down, passed them to the rescue coordinator. The coordinates placed Flight 66 exactly where it had crashed. But then the voice added something else. New coordinates. A second set of numbers that placed the aircraft somewhere impossible. Somewhere deep underground, miles below the surface of Mount Sanford. Margaret asked for clarification. The response chilled her. The voice said, We kept going. It didn't stop at the mountain. The third transmission provided more impossible coordinates. The fourth described conditions that made no sense. Pressure readings that would crush any aircraft. Temperature extremes that would vaporize metal. The fifth transmission was just screaming. High-pitched and continuous for 47 seconds. Then nothing. By March 17th, the controllers were terrified. These weren't survivors. Couldn't be. But something was using Flight 66's radio. Something was transmitting from that mountain. Something that knew details about the flight that only the crew should have known. Passenger manifests, cargo contents, flight plans, all accurate, all correct, but delivered in that distorted, drowning voice that sounded less human with each transmission. The file contained notes from a meeting held on March 18th. Military officials, FAA representatives, scientists from the University of Alaska. They listened to recordings of the transmissions, analyzed the signal strength, tried to triangulate the exact source. The signals were definitely coming from Mount Sanford, but not from the crash site, from somewhere inside the mountain. Deep inside, the geologists said it was impossible. There were no caves that deep, no chambers, just solid rock and ice. Yet the signals kept coming, getting stronger, getting clearer, getting more insistent. Transmission 9 came at 0156 hours on March 19th. It was Captain Sullivan, his voice, or something doing a perfect imitation. It recited the final moments of the flight, described the loss of visibility, the icing, the desperate attempt to gain altitude. Then it described the impact, but not from inside the cockpit, from outside, like something had been watching. It described the plane hitting the mountain, the fuselage crumpling, the passengers dying, but then it kept going. Described what happened after, how the wreckage kept moving, kept sinking, pulled down into the mountain like the rock itself was liquid, like something was drawing them in. The voice said they were still in the plane, all 36 of them, still strapped into their seats, still frozen in their death poses, but somewhere else now, somewhere dark and cold and deep, somewhere that wasn't quite physical space. The voice used a phrase that appeared multiple times in the transcripts, the spaces between. Transmission 12 was different, multiple voices, overlapping, passengers and crew all speaking at once, creating a chorus of distorted, drowning words. They were describing their surroundings, a vast chamber, not rock, not ice, something else, something that moved, something alive. They were inside something. The plane had crashed not just into a mountain, but into something that lived in the mountain. Something ancient, something that had been there long before humans ever set foot in Alaska. By March 20th, the decision was made to stop responding to the transmissions, to stop sending rescue teams, to classify the entire incident and bury it. The official story would be simple. Plane crashed, everyone died, wreckage recovered, end of story. No mention of the impossible radio signals. No mention of the voices from inside the mountain. The final transmission came at 1,314 hours on March 21st. 9 days after the crash, 4 days after the signals started. It was the clearest one yet. Captain Sullivan's voice. Calm, almost matter of fact. He said they understood now. Understood where they were. What had taken them. He said the mountain wasn't really a mountain. It was something else wearing a mountain's shape. Something that had been here for millions of years. Something that fed on metal and electricity and the energy given off by dying things. The planes that crashed into it weren't the accidents. They were harvested, pulled in deliberately, used. The voice said Flight 66 would be the last transmission. They were being integrated now, becoming part of whatever lived in Mount Sanford. Their consciousnesses merging with something vast and cold and utterly alien. The voice thanked the controllers for listening. Then it said something that haunted everyone who heard the recording. It said, tell them to avoid the mountains. Tell them it's hungry. Tell them it's learning to reach further. Then silence. The transmission stopped. Flight 66's frequency went dead. In the 76 years since, there has never been another signal from that crash site. Mount Sanford stands quiet and cold and seemingly normal. Just another peak in the Alaska range. Nothing special, nothing unusual, except planes still crash there. More than they should, more than statistics can explain. Small aircraft mostly, bush planes, private flights, they lose power. Lose control, go down somewhere on Sanford's slopes. And sometimes, for a few days after, controllers pick up weird signals. Brief, fragmented, never clear enough to understand, never long enough to trace, just enough to make them wonder. I found the Flight 66 file by accident. Was researching historical crash data for a safety presentation. Found a locked drawer in the archive room. Found a key that shouldn't have existed. Found files that had been deliberately hidden. Flight 66 was just one of them. There were others. Other incidents. Other mountains. Other impossible transmissions from places where everyone was definitely dead. I made copies, took them home, spent months going through every page. Every transcript, every witness statement, every photograph of wreckage that showed strange marks. Stress patterns that didn't match normal crashes. Metal that looked like it had been pulled rather than broken. I started connecting patterns. Certain mountains had higher crash rates. Certain peaks seemed to attract aircraft like magnets. And in almost every case, there were reports of strange signals afterward. Brief transmissions, voices that shouldn't exist, calls from the dead. I tried to bring it up with my supervisors, tried to suggest we investigate, track the patterns, figure out what was happening. They shut me down immediately. Told me those files were classified for a reason. Told me to forget what I read. Told me that asking questions about Flight 66 was a good way to end my career. So I stopped asking. But I didn't stop researching. Didn't stop tracking the crashes. Didn't stop listening for the signals. Last year, a Cessna went down on Mount Sanford. Pilot and 3 passengers. All experienced. Good weather. No mechanical issues. Just sudden loss of control and impact at 10,000 feet. I monitored the frequency that night. Heard nothing. Figured maybe I was wrong. Maybe the Flight 66 story was just Cold War paranoia and natural radio interference. Then, 3 days later, at 03:04 hours, I heard it. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. A voice on the Cessna's frequency. Giving coordinates. Describing descent. Using that same phrase. Still descending. I recorded it. Analyzed it. The voice print matched the pilot. A man who had been confirmed dead for 72 hours. I filed a report. It vanished. No one acknowledged it. No one investigated. The crash was ruled pilot error and forgotten. But I know what I heard. I know Flight 66 wasn't too unique. I know something in those mountains is still hungry. Still pulling planes down. Still harvesting whatever it needs from the wreckage and the dead. And I know one day it might reach further. Might not be satisfied with mountain crashes. Might learn to pull planes from clear skies. From safe altitudes. From anywhere it wants. Captain Sullivan, his final transmission warned us. Told us it was learning. That was 76 years ago. How much has it learned since then? How much further can it reach now? I don't know. But every time I hear about an unexplained crash in Alaska, every time a plane goes down in the mountains for no clear reason, I wonder. I listen to the frequencies. Wait for the signals. The voices from the spaces between. The transmissions from places where the dead should stay silent. And sometimes, late at night, I hear them. Still descending. Still calling. Still trying to warn us about what waits in the mountains. Story 2. Ship that wouldn't let me leave. I saw something on Kodiak Island that I can explain, and I need you to understand that I'm not crazy. I am a marine salvage diver. Been doing this work for 17 years. Seen things on the ocean floor that would make your skin crawl. But nothing prepared me for what I found inside the SS Coldbrook, and nothing will ever make me go back. The Coldbrook was a cargo ship that went down in 1943 during World War II, just off the coast of Kodiak Island in Alaska. She was carrying supplies to Dutch Harbor when a winter storm hit. Waves like mountains. Wind that could strip paint off steel. The ship broke apart on the rocks, and of the 42 men aboard, only 3 made it to shore. The rest went down with her, trapped in compartments that flooded in seconds, their bodies entombed in freezing water and twisted metal. For 80 years, the wreck sat there, 300 feet down, slowly rusting into nothing. The Navy declared it a war grave, off limits to divers and salvagers. But last October, a shipping company hired my team to recover the cargo manifest and any personal effects we could find. The families wanted closure. The company wanted to clear their liability. I just wanted the paycheck. We arrived at the site on a gray morning, the kind where the sky and ocean blend into one endless sheet of slate. The water temperature was 38 degrees, cold enough to kill you in minutes without proper gear. My partner was a guy named Chen, good diver, quiet, professional. We worked together on a dozen wrecks, never had a problem. The descent took 15 minutes, following the anchor line down through water so dark it felt like swimming through ink. At 200 feet, my lights picked up the wreck. She was lying on her side, hull breached in multiple places, railings bent like wire, everything covered in a thick carpet of rust and marine growth. But what struck me immediately was how intact she was. Most wrecks this old are barely recognizable, broken into pieces by currents and corrosion. The cold brook looked like she'd gone down yesterday. Chen and I entered through a tear in the hull near the cargo holds. Inside, our lights cut through clouds of sediment, illuminating a frozen moment in time. Crates were still strapped down, personal belongings scattered across the floor, coffee cups sitting on tables like the crew had just stepped away. Everything was covered in a fine layer of silt, but beneath it, perfectly preserved by the cold water. That is when I felt it. A sensation like being watched, like someone was standing just outside the reach of my lights. Observing. I felt this before on other wrecks, that eerie awareness of the dead. Usually it passed. This time it didn't. We moved deeper into the ship, following a corridor toward the crew quarters. The walls were covered in rust that looked almost organic, like the ship itself was rotting from within. My light caught something on a door frame, and I stopped. Scratches, deep gouges in the metal, grouped in sets of 4, like someone had clawed at the door, trying to get out. Chen tapped my shoulder and pointed. Further down the corridor, a door was open, swinging gently in the current. Except there was no current down here. The water was completely still. I checked my equipment. Everything normal. Air supply good. No nitrogen narcosis symptoms. No equipment malfunctions. But my heart was hammering against my ribs, and every instinct I developed in 17 years of diving was screaming at me to turn around and get back to the surface. We entered the crew quarters. Bunks lined the walls, blankets still tucked in, photos pinned above beds showing smiling wives and children who had been waiting for men who never came home. In one corner, a footlocker sat open, letters spilled across the floor. The ink long since dissolved, but the paper somehow still intact. That's when my light caught the body. He was wedged in the corner behind a bunk, still in his uniform, perfectly preserved by the cold water and lack of oxygen. His skin was waxy and gray, eyes open, mouth frozen in what might have been a scream or might have been the last gasp for air. But what made my blood freeze was his hands. They were raised in front of his face, fingers bent like claws, nails broken and bloody. The metal wall in front of him was covered in scratches, hundreds of them, deep enough to gouge the steel. He'd been trying to claw his way out when he died. Chen grabbed my arm, pointed at something I missed. Behind the body, scratched into the wall in letters 6 inches high, was a single word: run. My air suddenly tasted wrong, metallic and bitter. I checked my gauges again. Everything still normal, but my body was reacting like I was breathing poison. Chen was backing toward the door, and I didn't blame him. We found what we came for. Time to leave. That is when all our lights went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, just went completely dead, all at once, plunging us into absolute darkness 300 feet underwater inside a shipwreck. I fumbled for my backup light, hands shaking. Finally got it on. The beam was weak, barely cutting through the darkness, but it was enough to see Chen's face. His eyes were wide, panicked, and he was pointing behind me. I turned slowly, not wanting to see but unable to stop myself. The corridor we'd come through was full of shapes, human shapes, standing motionless in the darkness, just at the edge of my light. Sailors in rotted uniforms, their faces pale and bloated, eyes reflecting my beam like animals caught in headlights. There must have been 20 of them, filling the corridor wall to wall, blocking our exit. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching us with dead eyes. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, nitrogen narcosis, carbon dioxide buildup, anything rational. But Chen saw them too. I could tell by the way he defrozen, by the sound of his breathing through the radio, fast and shallow and terrified. Then the closest one moved. Just a small motion, head tilting to the side like a curious dog, but it was enough to break the spell. We swam for the other exit, the one that led deeper into the ship instead of out. It was the wrong direction, taking us further from safety, but those things were between us and escape, and some primal part of my brain was screaming that we couldn't go near them, couldn't let them touch us. We raced through compartments I hadn't mapped, Chen right behind me, our weak lights bouncing off walls and debris. Behind us, I could hear sounds, metallic clanging, rhythmic and purposeful, like someone was following us, hitting the walls as they came. The temperature in my suit dropped, and I could see my breath fogging my mask, which should have been impossible this deep. We burst into what looked like the engine room, massive machinery looming around us like the skeleton of some mechanical beast. And that's where we found the rest of them. Bodies, dozens of them, still strapped into their stations or floating in the spaces between machines, all perfectly preserved, all with their hands raised and fingers clawed like they died scratching at something invisible. The entire crew, trapped down here when the ship went down, drowning in the dark while the storm raged above. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that their eyes were open, all of them, and they were moving, tracking us as we swam past, following our lights with slow, deliberate precision. Dead men watching the living invade their grave. My radio crackled, and Chen's voice came through, distorted and strange, like it was being filtered through water even though we were already underwater. He said we needed to surface now, that something was wrong with his air supply, that he couldn't breathe. I looked at his gauges. He had plenty of air, but he was hyperventilating, sucking down oxygen like he was drowning, panic setting in. Panic kills divers faster than anything. Once it takes hold, rational thought disappears, and people make fatal mistakes. I grabbed Chen's arm, tried to calm him down, but he shoved me away and bolted for what he thought was an exit. I screamed at him to stop, but he didn't listen. He disappeared through a hatch, and I heard a sound that will haunt me until I die. A scream. Through water, through his regulator, through the radio. A sound of pure terror cut short. Then silence. I swam after him, knowing I shouldn't. Knowing every second I stayed down here decreased my chances of survival. I found him wedged in a narrow passage, his tank caught on something, body convulsing. His regulator was out of his mouth, and his eyes were rolled back, showing only whites. But here is what I can explain. His air hose wasn't detangled. Nothing was blocking his airflow. He just stopped breathing, like something had reached into his lungs and switched them off. I tried to help him, tried to get his regulator back in his mouth, but his body went limp, and I knew he was gone. Drowned in a flooded ship, surrounded by the dead, just like the crew 80 years before. That's when I felt hands on my legs. Cold hands, strong hands, pulling me down and back toward the engine room. I kicked, thrashed, saw faces in the darkness. Dozens of them, pressing close. The dead crew of the Coldbrook, reaching for me with fingers that should have been bone but somehow still had flesh. Their mouths were moving, trying to speak, trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. Do you remember the swim to the surface? Do you remember cutting Chen's body loose or finding the exit or making the safety stops that should have taken 30 minutes? I just remember breaking through into gray daylight, screaming into my regulator, clawing at the boat like those sailors had clawed at the walls of their tomb. The company sent another team down a week later to recover Chen's body. They found the wreck exactly where it should be, found the crew quarters and engine room. But they didn't find Chen. They didn't find the body we'd seen in the corner or any of the others. The ship was empty, just rusted metal and scattered cargo, nothing more. They said I hallucinated everything. That nitrogen narcosis and the stress of the dive had made me see things that weren't there. But I know what I saw. I know it pulled me down in that engine room. And I know why Chen stopped breathing. The Coldbrook doesn't want to be disturbed. The men who died on her dawn want to be found or remembered or given closure. They want to stay down there in the cold and dark, and they want company. They were still drowning, over and over, reliving those final moments when the water rushed in and the lights went out and they realized no one was coming to save them. Last month, I got a call from another salvage company. They want to mount an expedition to the Coldbrook, recover more artifacts, maybe raise part of the wreck for a museum. They asked if I consult, share my maps and notes from the dive. I told them no. I told them to leave it alone, to let the dead rest. They were going anyway, sending a team of 6 divers next week. I think about calling them back, trying harder to make them understand. But what would I say? That the ship is haunted? That the crew is still down there, waiting? They laugh or think I lost my mind. So I stay silent and wait for the news report that is inevitable. The one about divers who went down to the Coldbrook and never came back up. Because that ship doesn't give back what it takes. It has been collecting crew for 80 years, adding to its roster one diver at a time. Chen is down there now. I'm sure of it. standing in that corridor with the others, waiting in the dark with his eyes open and his hands raised, waiting for the next person who was foolish enough to disturb the dead. Story 3. Mirror in the mountain. I saw myself die in the rearview mirror of my rental car, and that was 3 weeks ago. My name is Jake Donovan, and I am a pharmaceutical sales representative from Seattle. Last month, I drove through the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel in Alaska, the longest highway tunnel in North America. 2.5 miles of darkness carved straight through a mountain to reach the isolated town of Whittier. I thought it would be just another scenic detour on a business trip. I was catastrophically wrong. The tunnel operates on a schedule, one direction at a time, because it is only wide enough for a single lane. I arrived at the portal at 6:30 in the evening, October 4th. The attendant waved me through with the eastbound traffic. 14 cars ahead of me. My Honda Civic 16th in line. I remember counting because what happened next made me obsess over every detail. The tunnel swallowed us immediately. Not gradual darkness, but instant, total black except for headlights reflecting off wet concrete walls. The road was rough. Old railroad tracks still embedded in the pavement from when this tunnel served the military during World War II. My car vibrated over each rail tie. The sound echoed off the walls, creating a rhythm that felt almost mechanical, almost deliberate. I was maybe 30 seconds in when I noticed the temperature drop. Not unusual for a tunnel, but this was severe. My breath started fogging. The windows developed frost patterns from the inside. In seconds, I cranked the heat. It made no difference. Then I saw the figure in my rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, maybe 50 feet behind me, just standing there, perfectly still. The headlights from the car behind me should have illuminated it completely, but the light seemed to bend around the figure, creating a silhouette darker than the surrounding darkness. I kept driving. What else could I do? The tunnel does not allow stopping, does not allow turning around. You go forward or you cause a catastrophic pileup. But I kept glancing at the mirror. The figure remained. Same distance, same position, moving with us somehow, matching our speed exactly while appearing completely motionless. The car behind me started flashing its lights. Rapid, panicked flashing. Then it swerved. I watched in my mirror as it veered right, scraping the tunnel wall with a shower of sparks. The driver was trying to avoid something in the road, but there was nothing there, just empty pavement and that impossible standing figure that only I seemed to see. The car behind me hit the wall hard enough to deploy its airbags. It spun to a stop, blocking both lanes. I should have stopped, should have helped, but my foot pressed the accelerator instead. Some primal part of my brain screaming to get out of that tunnel. To reach daylight, to escape. I looked at my rearview mirror again. The crashed car was there, steam rising from its crumpled hood. And standing beside it, looking directly at my reflection, was the figure. Close enough now to see details. It wore what looked like a military uniform. World War II era. Dark fabric. But where the face should be was just smooth skin. No eyes. No mouth. No features at all. Just blank flesh stretched over a skull. And it was screaming. I could not hear it. The sound was too low or too high for human ears. But I felt it, vibrating through my chest, through my bones. A scream that bypassed my ears and went straight into my nervous system. I accelerated harder. The cars ahead were pulling away, unaware of the crash behind them. I was alone now in a pocket of darkness between the main group and the wreckage. Alone except for what was in my mirror. The figure was closer. Somehow it had moved, or I had moved backward, or the space between us had compressed. It stood 20 feet behind my bumper now, still screaming silently, still staring with no eyes. I focused on the road ahead. The tunnel stretched endlessly. I had been driving for what felt like 10 minutes, but my dashboard clock showed only 90 seconds had passed. The concrete walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. The tunnel was narrowing, or my perception was breaking. That is when I heard the actual scream. Not felt, heard. A woman, his voice echoing through the tunnel, bouncing off walls, amplified and distorted until it sounded like 1,000 women screaming in unison. I checked my mirror reflexively. The figure was in my back seat, sitting directly behind me. Blank face inches from my head. I could see it in the rear view. But when I spun around to look, the back seat was empty. I looked forward again. It was there in the mirror, reaching forward. Smooth, featureless hands extending toward my shoulders. I screamed, yanked the wheel. My car hit the left wall, scraped along it for 20 feet, tires squealing. I forced myself to look only at the road, only forward, not at mirrors, not at reflections, just the tunnel ahead and the distant glow of the exit. But I could feel it, the presence behind me, cold radiating from the back seat. That silent scream vibrating through the car, this frame. And something else? A smell. Sulfur and rot and something chemical. Like old explosives. Like cordite from ancient ammunition. My phone rang. Impossible. No signal in the tunnel. I had checked when I entered. But it was ringing, playing my default ringtone. I grabbed it from the cup holder. The screen showed an incoming call from my own number. I was calling myself. I answered without thinking. The voice on the other end was mine. But wrong. Flat. Emotionless. It said I needed to stop the car. Said I needed to turn around. Said there was something in the back seat that wanted to show me what happened here. What really happened in this tunnel during the war. I hung up. Threw the phone. It landed in the passenger footwell. It kept ringing. 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 Each ring perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of my tires hitting the old railroad tracks. The tunnel was getting darker. My headlights were dimming. Not dying. Dimming. As if the darkness was physical. As if it was absorbing the light. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The concrete walls had changed texture. They looked wet, glistening, covered in something that moved sluggishly, dripping down toward the road. I realized it was not water. It was too thick, too dark. My headlights caught rivulets of it flowing down the walls, pooling on the pavement. I drove through a puddle of it. The substance splashed up onto my windshield. The wipers smeared it around. It looked like oil, smelled like blood. My mirror showed the figure was gone from the back seat. Relief lasted exactly 1 second. Then I saw where it had moved. It was standing in the road ahead, directly in my path, arms spread wide, blank face tilted upward, mouth opening where no mouth should be, opening wider, too wide, unhinging like a snake. I was going to hit it. 50 miles per hour, no time to brake, no room to swerve. I braced for impact. The car passed through it. No collision, no resistance, just a moment of profound cold as I drove through the space where it stood. And in that moment, I was not in my car anymore. I was standing in the tunnel, wearing a uniform, holding a rifle. The year was 1943. This tunnel was a secret military installation, a storage facility for something we should never have built, something we tested here, something that opened doors we could not close. I saw them, soldiers, my brothers, screaming, tearing at their faces, their skin coming off in sheets, not burned, not damaged, just peeling away like paint, revealing nothing underneath. Empty space, darkness wearing human shape. The experiment had worked. We had found a way to fold space, to create doors through reality. But we had not understood what lived in those folded spaces, what waited for doors to open. The vision ended. I was back in my car, still driving, still moving forward. But everything had changed. The tunnel walls were lined with figures now, hundreds of them, all in military uniforms, all with blank faces, all screaming silently. They pressed against the concrete, reaching toward me, clawing at nothing, trapped in the walls themselves, living in the reflection between reality and whatever space we had opened in 1943. My phone was ringing again. I ignored it. The exit was visible now. A circle of gray light ahead. Daylight. Safety. Normal reality. 500 feet. 400. 300. The figures in the walls moved faster, pressing harder. I saw cracks forming in the concrete. Spider web patterns spreading. They were breaking through. After 80 years trapped in folded space. After 8 decades of silent screaming. They were finally forcing their way back into the real world. 200 feet from the exit, my rearview mirror showed the tunnel behind me collapsing. Not physically, but dimensionally. Space folding in on itself. The darkness becoming absolute, consuming everything. The crashed car vanished into it. The road vanished. Only the folded space remained. And it was spreading, chasing me toward the exit. 100 feet. The figures had broken through. They stood on the road behind me. Hundreds of them, moving in perfect synchronization. Walking toward my car. Not running, just walking, patient, inevitable. They had waited 80 years. They could wait another 30 seconds. 50 feet. I could see individual raindrops beyond the tunnel mouth. Could see trees, normal Alaska landscape, the real world. So close. And then I looked at my side mirror. The figure was there. Not behind me, beside me, running alongside my car, keeping perfect pace. Its blank face turned toward me. Mouth open. That impossible mouth. And inside the mouth was not a throat, was not darkness, was something worse. Inside the mouth was the tunnel. The entire tunnel, stretching forever, folded back on itself. Infinite space compressed into a single opening. It spoke, not with words, with that bone-deep vibration. It told me that I had been chosen, that I had seen what was hidden, that I now carried the memory of the experiment, the knowledge of what we did, what we opened, and that knowledge made me a door. A living door between reality and the folded space. 20 feet from the exit. The figure reached through my window. Not breaking glass, just passing through. Solid matter meant nothing in the fold. Its hand touched my shoulder. Cold beyond cold, cold that burned, cold that changed. I felt my reflection split, felt myself divide. One version staying in the car, one version pulled into the fold, into the walls, into the silent screaming. I burst out of the tunnel into daylight. Rain hit my windshield. Normal sound, normal light. I was through. I was safe. I pulled over immediately, shaking, breathing hard. Other cars passed me. The tunnel entrance behind me looked completely normal. Just concrete and darkness and nothing unusual. I checked my mirrors. No figures, no darkness, no folded space, just a normal tunnel. I had imagined it. Stress, altitude, something. Then I looked at my phone. 47 missed calls, all from my own number, all lasting exactly 2.5 minutes. The length of time it takes to drive through the tunnel, all placed while I was inside. While my phone had no signal, I listened to the voicemails. Every single one was the same. My voice, flat, emotionless, saying I needed to go back, saying I needed to help them, saying I was part of the fold now, saying I would always be part of the fold. That was 3 weeks ago. I have not been able to look at my reflection since. Not in mirrors, not in windows, not in any reflective surface. Because when I do, I see myself standing in that tunnel, wearing a World War II uniform, face smooth and blank, mouth opening too wide, trapped in the walls, screaming silently. The doctors say it is trauma, hallucinations. They prescribed medication. It does not help, because every night at exactly 6:30, my phone rings. My own number, my own voice, reminding me that I am a door, that the experiment never ended, that the folded space is still there, still spreading, still waiting for enough people to see it, to know about it, to become doors themselves. I am telling you this story because you need to know. The Anton Anderson Tunnel is not just a tunnel. It is a scar, a wound in reality that never healed. And every person who drives through it, every person who sees the figures, every person who hears the screams, they become part of the fold. They become doors. And doors can open from both sides. Last night, I saw a news report. A car crashed in the tunnel. Driver said he swerved to avoid someone standing in the road. Someone in a military uniform. Someone with no face. The accident happened at exactly the spot where I saw the first figure. The same spot where the experiment was conducted in 1943. More doors are opening. The fold is spreading. And I cannot stop looking at my reflection. Cannot stop seeing what I have become. Cannot stop hearing my own voice on the phone every night, telling me to come back, to bring others, to help them finally break through. I am driving to Alaska next week. I have to. The pull is too strong. The fold calls to its doors. And I'm going to drive through that tunnel again. Going to see what waits in the walls. Going to join the silent screamers. But before I go, I needed to tell someone. Needed to warn you. If you ever drive through the Anton Anderson Tunnel, if you ever see figures in your mirrors, if you ever hear your phone ring with your own number, do not answer. Do not look back. And whatever you do, do not stop. Because the fold is patient. The fold is hungry. And the fold remembers everyone who sees it. I will see you in the walls. Story 4. Tsunami of souls. The bodies wash up at 3 in the morning, every March 27, without fail. I know because they seen them. One of the few people left who knows the truth about what happened in Old Valdez, Alaska, during the Good Friday earthquake of 1964. My name is Robert Chen, and I am a marine salvage diver. What I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but I swear on everything I hold sacred that it is true. It started 6 months ago when I took a contract job in Valdez. The new Valdez, built 4 miles from where the original town stood before the earthquake destroyed it. Most people don't know there were 2 Valdez locations. The first one, Old Valdez, was wiped off the map by a tsunami that came roaring in at over 100 miles per hour after the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in North American history. 9.2 on the Richter scale. The ground shook for 4.5 minutes. Buildings collapsed. The earth opened up, and then the wave came. The company that hired me wanted me to survey the underwater ruins of the old town. They were planning to build a new shipping facility and needed to make sure the submerged foundations wouldn't interfere with construction. Simple job, 3 weeks of diving in cold water, mapping the debris field, taking measurements. Good pay, no complications. I should have known better when the local dive shop owner refused to rent me equipment. Said he didn't care how much money I offered. He wouldn't help anyone go down to Old Valdez. When I asked why, he just looked at me with this haunted expression and told me some places should stay buried. I found another shop 2 towns over. Got my gear, hired a boat captain named Sam who was willing to take me out to the coordinates. He was quiet during the ride, wouldn't make eye contact, kept his hands tight on the wheel like he was afraid of something. The water above Old Valdez is dark. Not just deep water dark, but wrong dark. Like the ocean itself doesn't want light penetrating to what lies below. My first dive was on a clear afternoon in late September. Visibility should have been decent. Instead, my lights barely cut through the murk. The ruins appeared slowly as I descended. Twisted metal, collapsed buildings, a school bus lying on its side, windows empty and black. Everything was covered in a thick layer of silt that hadn't been disturbed in 60 years. The place felt frozen in time, preserved in its moment of destruction. I was taking measurements near what had been the waterfront when I saw the first one. A figure, standing in the doorway of a submerged building. Just standing there, perfectly still, arms at its sides. My first thought was that it was a statue, maybe a memorial someone had placed. But as I swam closer, I realized it was a body. Perfectly preserved. A woman in a 1960s dress, her hair floating around her face, her eyes open and staring. No decomposition. No damage from scavengers, just standing there like she'd been waiting for 60 years. I reported it immediately, brought up Sam, brought up the authorities. They sent down a recovery team the next day. But when they reached the coordinates I demarked, the body was gone. Just gone. The doorway was empty. The divers searched for hours and found nothing. They thought I made a mistake, suggested the visibility had been poor, that I'd seen a piece of debris or a trick of the light. I knew what I'd seen, but I didn't argue. I went back down the next day. This time there were 3 of them. The woman in the doorway, a man standing on what had been a street corner, a child sitting on the steps of the collapsed school. All perfectly preserved, all impossibly still, all staring at nothing with empty eyes. I approached the child carefully. As I got within 10 feet, its head turned, slowly, deliberately, until it was looking directly at me. I've been diving for 20 years. I've seen sharks. I've been in zero visibility in shipwrecks. I've dealt with equipment failures at depth. Nothing has ever terrified me like that moment when the dead child turned its head and looked at me. I surfaced immediately, told Sam I was done for the day. He didn't ask questions, just gunned the engine and got us back to shore as fast as the boat would go. That night, I researched the earthquake, read survivor accounts, studied the casualty lists, looked at photographs from before and after. 32 people died in Old Valdez when the tsunami hit. Most of the bodies were never recovered. The wave had taken them, pulled them into the ocean, dragged them down into the ruins of their own town. The survivors said the water had been full of debris and bodies, churning together in a nightmare of destruction. But there was something else in the accounts, something the official reports didn't mention. Survivors talk about seeing people in the water after the wave receded. People they recognized, neighbors, friends, family members, standing in the wreckage, staring, not moving, not calling for help, just standing there in water up to their chests, perfectly still, watching the survivors flee. When rescue teams arrived hours later, those figures were gone. The survivors assumed they'd been swept away by aftershocks or secondary waves. But some of them swore the figures hadn't looked quite right, had moved in strange ways, had eyes that didn't reflect light properly. The locals called them the tsunami souls, the spirits of those who'd been taken by the wave and refused to leave. Bound to the ruins of Old Valdez, trapped between life and death, waiting for something. No one knew what. I went back down a week later. I had to. The company was paying good money, and I needed to finish the survey. But this time, I went prepared. I brought an underwater camera. I was going to get proof. The bodies were everywhere. Dozens of them, standing in doorways, sitting in cars, lying on the seafloor with their faces turned up toward the surface. All perfectly preserved, all watching me with those terrible, empty eyes. I photographed everything, spent 2 hours documenting the impossible. When I surfaced, I was shaking so badly I could barely climb into the boat. Sam took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. Just got me back to shore. I downloaded the images that night in my hotel room. Every single photograph showed the same thing. Empty water, silt-covered ruins, no bodies, no figures, just debris and darkness. The camera had recorded nothing, like they hadn't been there at all. Like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't. I knew what I'd seen, and I was starting to understand what was happening. The tsunami souls weren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They were something else, some kind of echo, a recording burned into the fabric of that place by the sheer trauma of what had happened there. The earthquake had been so powerful it had literally changed the landscape. Raised the ground by 30 feet in some places, dropped it by 8 feet in others. The energy released had been equivalent to several nuclear bombs. That kind of force doesn't just affect the physical world. It leaves scars on reality itself. I finished the survey over the next 2 weeks. Each dive, there were more of them. More bodies, more figures standing in the ruins, watching me, following me with their eyes as I swam past. Never moving, never approaching, just watching. On my final dive, I found the epicenter, the place where the wave had hit hardest, where an entire city block had been reduced to rubble in seconds. The bodies were thick there, packed together like they'd all been trying to reach the same place when the water took them. And in the center, I found him. A man in a dock worker's uniform, standing on what had been the waterfront, his arms raised like he was trying to ward off something. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His eyes were wide with terror. But unlike the others, this one was different. There was something behind those eyes, some fragment of awareness, of consciousness, like part of him was still there, still trapped in that moment, still feeling the wave hit, still drowning, still dying, over and over for 60 years. I reached out toward him without thinking. My gloved hand passed within inches of his chest, and suddenly, I wasn't underwater anymore. I was standing on the dock in Old Valdez on March 27, 1964, at 5:36 in the evening. The ground was shaking, the most violent shaking I ever felt. Buildings were collapsing around me. People were screaming. And then I heard it, a sound like a freight train, like the end of the world. The roar of billions of gallons of water rushing toward the shore at unimaginable speed. I turned and saw the wave, a wall of water 60 feet high, black with debris and silt, crowned with white foam, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. It blocked out the sky. It blocked out everything. And then it hit. The impact was like being struck by a hammer made of concrete. The water was so cold it felt like knives. I was tumbling, spinning, being pulled down into darkness, debris slamming into me from every direction. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the terrible crushing weight of the ocean trying to grind me into nothing. And then I was back, underwater, in my dive suit, staring at the dock worker who was staring back at me with recognition in his dead eyes. Like he knew I just experienced what he'd been experiencing for 60 years. Like he was grateful someone finally understood. I surfaced and never went back down. Told the company I completed the survey, submitted my report, collected my pay, and left Alaska that same night. But the experience stayed with me. The feeling of drowning, the sound of that wave, the weight of the water, it haunted my dreams. Still does. 3 weeks ago, I got a message from Sam. Short and simple. Said I should know that every year, on March 27th, at exactly 5:36 p.m., the bodies wash up. Not on the shore, not where you expect. They appear in the water above Old Valdez. All of them, floating just beneath the surface. Visible from boats, visible from the air. Dozens of perfectly preserved bodies from 1964, rising from the ruins for exactly 4.5 minutes. The same length of time the earthquake lasted. Then they sink back down, disappear, return to their endless vigil in the ruins below. Sam said locals have known about it for years but never talk about it. Never mention it to outsiders. Keep it secret because some things are too terrible to share, too impossible to explain. I looked at the calendar. March 27th is next week. I should stay away. Should forget about Old Valdez and the tsunami souls and that moment when I felt what it was like to drown in a wave of destruction. Should let the dead keep their secrets. But I can stop thinking about that dock worker. About the awareness in his eyes. About the fact that he has been trapped in his moment of death for 60 years. Feeling that wave hit over and over. Drowning endlessly, unable to move on. About all 32 of them, bound to the ruins, waiting for something that might never come. I think I'm going back. Not to dive, just to witness, to see the bodies rise, to acknowledge what happened there, to bear witness to their suffering. Maybe that's what they need. Maybe that's what they've been waiting for all these years. Someone to remember, someone to understand, someone to know that they're still there, still trapped, still drowning in the tsunami of souls. Story 5. Thing that wore my daughter. This voice, the screaming started at 3 in the morning, and it sounded exactly like my daughter. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in Alaska. I am a rational person. I spent 20 years as an electrical engineer, worked on projects that required precision and logic. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters or things that go bump in the night. Or at least, I didn't. Not until that fishing trip to the Tongass National Forest. Not until I heard my daughter, his voice calling to me from the river, begging me to save her. The problem was, my daughter was 3,000 miles away in Seattle, safe in her college dorm. It was September, and I'd taken a week off to fly fish in Southeast Alaska. Just me, some borrowed gear, and a small cabin I rented on the edge of the forest near a place called Otter Creek. The local who rented me the cabin, an older Tlingit man named William, had warned me about going near the water after dark. He didn't explain why, just looked at me with these serious eyes and said the forest played tricks on people, especially outsiders who didn't respect it. I smiled and nodded, thinking it was just small-town superstition, the kind of story locals tell tourists to make things more interesting. I wish I had listened. The first 2 days were perfect. Clear skies, good fishing, the kind of solitude you can only find in Alaska where the wilderness stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. But on the third night, something changed. The forest went quiet. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the underbrush. Just oppressive silence that pressed against my ears like cotton. That's when I heard her voice. It came from the direction of the creek, maybe 50 yards from the cabin. My daughter Sarah, crying, calling out for me. Dad, help me. I'm stuck. I can. Get out, please, Dad. It hurts. The fear in her voice was so real, so immediate, that I was on my feet and out the door before my conscious mind could catch up. I ran through the trees with just a flashlight, branches whipping my face, my heart hammering. The voice kept calling, moving, always just ahead of me, leading me deeper toward the water. Dad, where are you? I'm so cold. Please, Don, leave me. It was perfect. Every inflection, every crack in her voice, exactly how Sarah sounded when she was frightened. I burst through the tree line onto the creek bank, and the voice stopped. The water was black and fast-moving, reflecting my flashlight in broken shards. The far bank was thick with vegetation, and the forest beyond was an impenetrable wall of darkness. I swept my light back and forth, calling Sarah's name, my rational mind finally catching up and screaming that this was impossible, that Sarah was in Seattle, that something was very wrong. That's when I saw the eyes. Dozens of them, reflecting in the beam of my flashlight from the opposite bank. Low to the ground, unblinking, arranged in a semicircle like an audience watching a performance. They didn't move, just stared at me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. Then one of them stood up. It rose on 2 legs, taller than any man, its body covered in dark matted fur that glistened wet in the moonlight. The shape was wrong, proportions too long in the arms, too short in the legs, head too large and angular. And its face, God, its face was almost human but not quite, like someone had tried to sculpt a person from memory and gotten the details wrong. It opened its mouth, and my daughter's voice came out. Dad, I want. Did you help me? I ran. Pure instinct, no thought, just blind terror driving my legs back through the forest toward the cabin. Behind me, I heard splashing, multiple sources, things entering the water and crossing toward my side. I didn't look back. I just ran, crashing through branches, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I made it to the cabin, slammed the door, threw the bolt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work my phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. I was 50 miles from the nearest town. I went to every window, checked every lock, pulled the curtains closed. Outside, the forest had gone silent again. Then the voices started. My daughter Sarah, still crying, now joined by others. My ex-wife Jennifer, calling my name in that concerned tone she used when she thought I was making a mistake. My father, dead for 5 years, asking me why I never visited his grave. My childhood friend Marcus, laughing the way he used to before the car accident. All of them outside, all of them calling to me, begging me to open the door, to come out, to help them. The voices circled the cabin, sometimes close enough that I could hear breathing through the walls, sometimes distant and echoing through the trees. I lasted until dawn, huddled in the corner with a kitchen knife, listening to the dead and distant beg for my attention. When the sun finally came up, the voices stopped. The forest came alive again with normal sounds. Birds singing, wind in the trees, the distant rush of the creek. I was packed and in my rental car within 10 minutes, driving the dirt road back toward civilization. I made it maybe 5 miles before the road was blocked. A massive spruce had fallen across both lanes, too big to move, too thick to drive around. It hadn't been there when I'd driven in 3 days ago. I got out to assess the situation, and that is when I noticed the scratch marks on the trunk. Deep gouges, evenly spaced, running the length of the fallen tree. Claw marks, whatever had made them was big enough and strong enough to tear into wood like it was paper. The walk back to town took 6 hours. I stayed on the road, didn't let myself look into the forest on either side, didn't respond when I heard my name being called from the trees. Because I heard it over and over, different voices, different tones, all trying to lure me off the path. When I finally reached the outskirts of town, I went straight to William, his house. He took one look at my face and nodded, like he'd been expecting me. He invited me in, made coffee, and then he told me about the Kushtaka. In Tlingit legend, the Kushtaka are shapeshifters, creatures that live in the boundary between land and water. They look like otters mostly, but they can take human form, can mimic any voice they ever heard. They lure people to the water, especially children, especially the lost and vulnerable. Sometimes they kill, sometimes they do something worse. They transform their victims into more Kushtaka, adding to their numbers, spreading their territory. William said the forest near Otter Creek had been Kushtaka territory for centuries. The Tlingit knew to avoid it after dark, to never respond to voices calling from the water, to never follow the crying of a child or the pleas of a loved one. He said I was lucky. Most people who encountered them didn't make it back. I asked him why he rented me the cabin if he knew what was out there. He said he tried to warn me, but outsiders never listened. They thought they knew better, thought the indigenous people were just superstitious. He said maybe now I believe. I flew back to Seattle that night, didn't even wait to get my deposit back on the cabin. I called Sarah from the airport just to hear her real voice, to confirm she was safe. She asked if I was okay, said I sounded strange. I told her I loved her and hung up. That was 3 months ago. I haven't been back to Alaska. Haven't been fishing. Haven't been anywhere I can see other people, where civilization feels close and safe. But here, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night, the thing I can rationalize away no matter how hard I try. Last week, I was walking through a park near my apartment. It was dusk, that weird twilight time when shadows get long and the world feels different. I passed a pond, one of those man-made things with a fountain in the middle and ducks begging for bread. From the far side, half hidden in the reeds, I heard Sarah's voice. Dad, come here. I want to show you something. The thing is, I just talked to Sarah an hour before. She was at a study group, confirmed by her roommate, nowhere near this park. But the voice was perfect, exactly like her, right down to the slight lisp she gets when she is excited. I looked across the pond, and there in the fading light, I saw eyes. Dozens of them, low to the ground, watching me from the shadows. And one shape, taller than the rest, standing on 2 legs at the water's edge. I walked away, didn't run, didn't look back, just walked calmly to my car and drove home. But now I can, and stop thinking about it. The Kushtaka are supposed to be in Alaska, in the rivers and forests of the Pacific Northwest. They were not supposed to be here, in Seattle, in city parks. I made it to the cabin, slammed the door, threw the bolt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work my phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. I was 50 miles from the nearest town. I went to every window, checked every lock, pulled the curtains closed. Outside, the forest had gone silent again. Then the voices started. My daughter Sarah, still crying, now joined by others. My ex-wife Jennifer, calling my name in that concerned tone she used when she thought I was making a mistake. My father, dead for 5 years, asking me why I never visited his grave. My childhood friend Marcus, laughing the way he used to before the car accident. All of them outside, all of them calling to me, begging me to open the door, to come out, to help them. The voices circled the cabin, sometimes close enough that I could hear breathing through the walls, sometimes distant and echoing through the trees. I lasted until dawn, huddled in the corner with a kitchen knife, listening to the dead and distant beg for my attention. When the sun finally came up, the voices stopped. The forest came alive again with normal sounds. Birds singing, wind in the trees, the distant rush of the creek. I was packed and in my rental car within 10 minutes, driving the dirt road back toward civilization. I made it maybe 5 miles before the road was blocked. A massive spruce had fallen across both lanes, too big to move, too thick to drive around. It hadn't been there when I'd driven in 3 days ago. I got out to assess the situation, and that is when I noticed the scratch marks on the trunk. Deep gouges, evenly spaced, running the length of the fallen tree. Claw marks, whatever had made them was big enough and strong enough to tear into wood like it was paper. The walk back to town took 6 hours. I stayed on the road, didn't let myself look into the forest on either side, didn't respond when I heard my name being called from the trees. Because I heard it over and over, different voices, different tones, all trying to lure me off the path. When I finally reached the outskirts of town, I went straight to William, his house. He took one look at my face and nodded, like he'd been expecting me. He invited me in, made coffee, and then he told me about the Kushtaka. In Tlingit legend, the Kushtaka are shapeshifters, creatures that live in the boundary between land and water. They look like otters mostly, but they can take human form, can mimic any voice they've ever heard. They lure people to the water, especially children, especially the lost and vulnerable. Sometimes they kill, sometimes they do something worse. They transform their victims into more Kushtaka, adding to their numbers, spreading their territory. William said the forest near Otter Creek had been Kushtaka territory for centuries. The Tlingit knew to avoid it after dark, to never respond to voices calling from the water, to never follow the crying of a child or the pleas of a loved one. He said I was lucky. Most people who encountered them didn't make it back. I asked him why he rented me the cabin if he knew what was out there. He said he tried to warn me, but outsiders never listened. They thought they knew better, thought the indigenous people were just superstitious. He said maybe now I believe. I flew back to Seattle that night, didn't even wait to get my deposit back on the cabin. I called Sarah from the airport just to hear her real voice, to confirm she was safe. She asked if I was okay, said I sounded strange. I told her I loved her and hung up. That was 3 months ago. I haven't been back to Alaska. Haven't been fishing. Haven't been anywhere I can see other people, where civilization feels close and safe. But here, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night, the thing I can rationalize away no matter how hard I try. Last week, I was walking through a park near my apartment. It was dusk, that weird twilight time when shadows get long and the world feels different. I passed a pond, one of those man-made things with a fountain in the middle and ducks begging for bread. From the far side, half hidden in the reeds, I heard Sarah's voice. Dad, come here. I want to show you something. The thing is, I just talked to Sarah an hour before. She was at a study group, confirmed by her roommate, nowhere near this park. But the voice was perfect, exactly like her, right down to the slight lisp she gets when she is excited. I looked across the pond, and there in the fading light, I saw eyes. Dozens of them, low to the ground, watching me from the shadows. And one shape, taller than the rest, standing on 2 legs at the water's edge. I walked away, didn't run, didn't look back, just walked calmly to my car and drove home. But now I can, and stop thinking about it. The Kushtaka are supposed to be in Alaska, in the rivers and forests of the Pacific Northwest. They were not supposed to be here, in Seattle, in city parks. Unless they followed me, unless I brought something back with me, some connection or mark that lets them track me. Or maybe they've always been here, hiding in plain sight, in every body of water, every shadowed forest, every place where people go missing and are never found. William told me one more thing before I left. He said the Kushtaka dawned to give up. Once they've chosen someone, once they learned their voice and the voices of the people they love, they never stop trying. They be patient. They can wait years, decades, for the perfect moment when you, vulnerable or distracted or just tired of being afraid, That is when they take you. That is when you hear the voice of someone you die for, calling from the darkness, and you forget to be careful. You forget that monsters are real and they wear familiar faces. You take one step toward the water, and then another, and by the time you realize your mistake, it is too late. I hear Sarah's voice sometimes now, late at night when I'm alone. Coming from the bathroom, from the hallway, from outside my bedroom window. I know it's not real. I know she is safe in her dorm, living her life, completely unaware of what is hunting her father. But one night, I'm going to be tired. I am going to forget to check, forget to be paranoid, and I am going to open that door or look out that window, and something will be waiting. Something with my daughter's voice and eyes that reflect light like an animal. And I'll finally understand what it means to be transformed, to become something that waits in the dark and calls to the people you used to love, using a voice they trust, leading them to the water. Story 6. Ward that never sleeps. The handprint on the window appeared fresh, even though the hospital had been abandoned for 43 years. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a commercial real estate appraiser from Seattle, and last October I took a job that should have been routine. A development company wanted to buy the old Maynard Memorial Hospital in Nome, Alaska. They needed someone to assess the building's condition before making an offer. The pay was excellent. A week in Nome, all expenses covered, plus a fat bonus for dealing with the remote location and the approach of winter. I should have asked why they were offering so much money for such a simple job. The hospital was built in 1915 during the gold rush, when Nome was booming and people were flooding in from all over the country looking to strike it rich. Back then, the town needed medical facilities fast. They constructed Maynard Memorial in 8 months, a 3-story brick building on the edge of town with 50 beds and surgical facilities that were state-of-the-art for the time. Then the Spanish flu hit in 1918. Nome was devastated. The isolation that had protected the town from many diseases meant the population had no immunity. When the flu arrived on a supply ship that October, it tore through Nome like wildfire. Within 3 months, over 200 people were dead, a fifth of the entire population. Maynard Memorial became a morgue, the beds filled with dying patients, the hallways stacked with bodies waiting for burial. The permafrost made digging graves nearly impossible, so they stored corpses in the basement until spring. Nurses and doctors worked around the clock, watching helplessly as patients drowned in their own lungs, their skin turning blue-black, blood pouring from their noses and mouths. By the time the pandemic ended, the hospital staff was traumatized. 3 nurses had killed themselves. 2 doctors had suffered complete mental breakdowns. The building itself seemed infected with death. Even after they cleaned and disinfected everything, people said the smell of sickness never quite left. The hospital operated for another 60 years, but it was never the same. Staff reported strange occurrences, footsteps in empty corridors, shadows moving through closed wards, the sound of coughing and moaning from rooms that had been vacant for hours. Patients complained about feeling watched, about cold spots, about dreams of drowning. In 1980, they built a new medical center on the other side of town. Maynard Memorial was abandoned, left to decay. The city council talked about demolition for decades but never followed through. The building just sat there, slowly rotting, while the stories grew darker. I arrived in Nome on October 15th. The weather was already brutal, temperatures in the teens, wind howling in from the Bering Sea. The town felt isolated in a way that was hard to describe. 300 miles from the nearest city. No roads connecting to anywhere else. You fly in or you take a boat, and that's it. Once winter really hits, you re-trapped until spring. The hospital stood at the end of a dirt road on the northern edge of town. 3 stories of dark brick and broken windows, surrounded by dead grass and rusted chain-link fence. The front entrance was boarded up, but someone had torn away enough planks to create an opening. Graffiti covered the lower walls. Beer cans and cigarette butts littered the ground near the door. Local kids used it as a dare spot. Go inside, reach the 3rd floor, touch the door of the isolation ward where the worst flu cases had died. Prove you weren't too scared. Most of them didn't make it past the lobby. I went in just after noon, when the daylight was strongest. I had industrial flashlights, a camera, measuring equipment, and a floor plan from the city archives. I planned to work methodically, room by room, documenting everything. The lobby was exactly what I expected. peeling paint, water damage, holes in the ceiling where pipes had burst and been left to leak for years. The front desk was still there, covered in dust and bird droppings. Medical charts scattered across the floor, faded and illegible. The smell was overwhelming. Mold and rot and something else underneath. Something chemical and wrong. But the handprints bothered me immediately. They were everywhere. On the walls, on the broken windows, on the doors. Small handprints, like children had been pressing their palms against every surface. The weird part was how fresh they looked. Not dusty, not faded, just clear, distinct prints in what looked like condensation or oil. I photographed them and moved deeper into the building. The first floor was administrative offices and storage. Nothing unusual beyond the standard decay. I checked the basement next. That is where they de-stored the bodies during the pandemic. Where the morgue had been, the basement was worse than I expected. No windows, no natural light, just my flashlight beam cutting through absolute darkness. The air was thick and damp, hard to breathe. The walls were brick, weeping with moisture, and cold. So cold my breath came out in thick clouds. I found the morgue room. The metal tables were still there, bolted to the floor, rusted and bent. Drawers lined one wall, the kind used for storing bodies. Most hung open, empty, but 3 were closed, sealed shut with what looked like fresh padlocks. I didn't touch them. Something about those locked drawers made my skin crawl. Who would put new locks on body drawers in an abandoned hospital? And when? The locks showed no rust, no weathering, like they'd been installed recently. I photographed everything and got out of that basement as fast as I could. Back on the first floor, I caught my breath and tried to shake off the unease settling into my chest. This was just a building. An old, creepy building. But nothing more. The handprints were probably from kids. The locks were probably from squatters using the morgue for storage. I headed to the second floor. Patient wards. Long corridors lined with small rooms, each one originally holding 2 or 3 beds. Most of the beds were gone now, hauled away during the closure. But some remained, rusted frames with rotted mattresses, springs poking through. That is when I heard it. A wet, rattling cough, coming from somewhere down the hallway. Deep and harsh, like someone drowning. Like lungs filling with fluid. I froze, called out. No response. Just that terrible coughing, echoing through the empty ward. Then it stopped. Silence rushed back in. Heavy and expectant. I told myself it was pipes. Old buildings make noise, especially in the cold. Water in the pipes freezing and expanding. Totally normal, but my hands were shaking as I continued down the hallway. The rooms showed more handprints. Hundreds of them, covering the walls floor to ceiling. Small handprints, all roughly the same size. All pressed with enough force to leave distinct finger marks. In one room, they formed a pattern. Almost like words. Almost like someone had been trying to write something. I was photographing the pattern when I heard footsteps behind me. Light footsteps. Quick, running down the hallway toward where I stood. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping across empty corridor. Nothing, but the footsteps continued, getting closer. I could hear them clearly now. Small feet slapping on linoleum. Running fast. They stopped right outside the doorway, right where I'd be able to see if something was there. But there was nothing, just empty air and dust and the smell of mold. I backed into the corner of the room, my heart hammering. Waited, listened. The silence stretched out for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, I worked up the courage to leave the room. The hallway was empty. I made my way quickly to the stairs, ready to head up to the 3rd floor and finish this job as fast as possible. The 3rd floor was the isolation ward, where they kept the worst cases during the pandemic. The patients who were dying, who were too contagious to keep with the general population. The ones who spent their final hours drowning in bloody foam, their organs shutting down, their bodies turning black. The stairwell door to the 3rd floor was closed. I pushed it open and immediately the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath turned to fog. Frost covered the walls and floor, despite the fact that it wasn't cold enough outside for that kind of ice buildup. The windows up here were intact, sealed shut. No wind, no draft, just impossible, unnatural cold. The isolation ward consisted of one long hallway with 10 rooms, 5 on each side. At the far end was the nurses' station and the supply room. Every single door was closed. Every single door had a handprint on it, a small handprint, pressed right in the center, like something had marked each room. Claimed it. I opened the first door. The room was empty except for a single hospital bed. Someone was lying in it. A small figure under a white sheet. Perfectly still. I approached slowly, my flashlight shaking. Reached out to pull back the sheet. It was just wadded fabric. No body, no person, just sheets arranged to look like someone was there. But the pillow showed the clear impression of a head. Recent, fresh, like someone had just been lying there moments ago. Every room was the same. Empty bed, arranged sheets, fresh impressions on the pillows. Like invisible patients were occupying the ward. Like the hospital was still running. Still treating the sick and dying from 1918. In the 6th room, I found the photographs. Dozens of them, spread across the floor. Black and white images from the pandemic. Nurses in masks standing next to beds full of dying patients. Doctors examining bodies. And children. So many children. Young faces staring at the camera with hollow eyes and sunken cheeks. Their skin mottled with the dark lesions that marked the final stages of the flu. The same children whose handprints covered the walls. I recognized the sizes, the ages. These were the patients who... they died up here. The ones who... they spent their last hours in isolation. Alone, terrified, calling for parents who weren't allowed to visit. Dying without comfort. Without anyone holding their hands. The coughing started again, but this time it wasn't one person. It was many, all around me, from every room. Wet, rattling coughs, the sound of lungs failing. Of people drowning in their own fluids. The doors began to open, one by one, slowly, revealing the empty beds with their arranged sheets. And on each bed, the sheets were moving, rising and falling, like someone was breathing underneath them. Like invisible patients were lying there, coughing, dying, trapped in their final moments for over a century. I ran, flew down the stairs, through the 2nd floor, past the lobby, out the broken entrance. I didn't stop until I was on the main road, bent over, gasping, my lungs burning from the cold air. When I looked back, the hospital stood silent and dark. But in every 3rd floor window, I saw them. Small handprints, pressed against the glass from the inside. Dozens of them, like children, were standing at the windows, watching me leave, begging me not to abandon them again. I submitted my report the next day. Told the development company the building was structurally unsound. Too damaged for renovation. Recommended immediate demolition. They accepted my assessment without question. Maybe they sent other appraisers before me. Maybe those people had seen the same things and given the same recommendation. The hospital still stands. The demolition never happened. Because some buildings want to be torn down. Some places hold on to their dead, keep them trapped. Forever patients in a ward that never closes. Forever dying in an isolation that has no end. The children of Maynard Memorial are still there. Still pressing their hands against the walls. Still coughing in empty rooms. Still waiting for someone to help them. To save them. To end their suffering. But no one can. Because they died over 100 years ago, and death doesn't let go that easily. Not in Nome. Not in that hospital. Not ever. Story 7. I followed him into the white. The man ahead of me on the trail shouldn't have been there, and by the time I realized why, it was already too late to turn back. I'm telling you this because someone needs to know what really happens on Flat Top Mountain when the weather turns. The news will say I got disoriented in a whiteout, that I made poor decisions, that I'm lucky to be alive. But luck had nothing to do with it, and what happened up there wasn't about bad weather or getting lost. It was about him, the hiker who I sent, really a hiker at all. They moved to Anchorage 6 months earlier for work, IT consulting. Nothing exciting. Flat Top Mountain was the go-to trail everyone recommended, a 3-mile round trip with views of the city and Cook Inlet. Easy enough for beginners, popular enough that you never really alone. That was the appeal. I wasn't some experienced outdoorsman. I just wanted exercise and fresh air, maybe clear my head after the divorce. It was late October, that time of year when Alaska gets dark early and the first real snows start threatening. The forecast called for clear skies, temperature in the mid-30s, perfect hiking weather. I started up the trail around 2 in the afternoon, figuring I could be back down before sunset at 5. The first mile was packed dirt and gravel, winding through stunted trees and brush. I passed a few people coming down, couples with dogs, a group of college kids. Everyone was friendly, that casual Alaska way, nodding or offering quick hellos. The higher I climbed, the fewer people I saw, until I was alone on the trail with just the wind and my own breathing. That's when I noticed him ahead of me. He was maybe 50 yards up the trail, moving at a steady pace, wearing a blue jacket and a red beanie. Nothing unusual about that. Lots of people hike alone. but something about the way he moved caught my attention. His gait was perfectly rhythmic, mechanical, almost like he was a metronome keeping time. And he never looked back, never paused to catch his breath or adjust his pack, just kept walking at that same unwavering pace. I tried to close the distance between us, not to catch up necessarily, just to keep someone in sight. Solo hiking made me nervous, and having another person on the trail felt safer. But no matter how fast I walked, the gap between us stayed exactly the same. 50 yards, never more, never less. The trail got steeper, turning into a scramble over loose rock near the summit. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of snow. I could see clouds rolling in from the west, gray and low, moving faster than seemed natural. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. That's when the weather service warning hit my phone. Sudden whiteout conditions expected on mountain peaks. Descend immediately, zero visibility possible. I stopped to read it, and when I looked up, the man in the blue jacket had stopped too. He was standing at the edge of the summit plateau, perfectly still, facing away from me. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct I had was screaming to get off the mountain, but I was so close to the top, maybe 5 minutes away, and the clouds hadn't reached us yet. I told myself I'd just tag the summit, take a quick photo, and head straight back down. 5 minutes wouldn't make a difference. I was wrong. The moment I stepped onto the summit plateau, the world disappeared. The whiteout hit like someone had thrown a sheet over my head, instant and total. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, couldn't tell where the ground ended and the sky began. The wind howled, driving snow horizontally, ice crystals stinging any exposed skin. I dropped to my knees, trying to get below the wind, fumbling for my phone. The screen was so bright it hurt my eyes, but the GPS was useless. The map showed my location, but in whiteout conditions, I couldn't tell which direction was safe and which would send me over a cliff. That's when I heard footsteps, crunching through snow, steady and rhythmic, coming from my right. I shouted, asking for help, my voice immediately swallowed by the wind. The footsteps didn't stop or change pace. They just kept moving, circling around me. Then I saw him, the man in the blue jacket, appearing out of the white like a photograph developing. He was standing 10 feet away, still facing away from me, his red beanie the only spot of color in the blank world. He started walking, that same mechanical pace, heading in what I assumed was the direction of the trail down. I followed him. What choice did I have? He seemed to know where he was going, moving with confidence while I could barely stand in the wind. I kept my eyes locked on that red beanie, following it through the white, trusting that he was leading me to safety. We walked for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. The terrain felt wrong, rougher than I remembered, with unexpected drops and steep climbs. Several times I nearly lost sight of him, the whiteout so complete that he vanished completely, only to reappear a few seconds later, still walking, always just ahead. That is when I noticed he wasn't leaving footprints. The snow was 6 inches deep and getting deeper, and I was post-holing with every step, my boots punching through the fresh powder. But ahead of me, where the man in the blue jacket walked, the snow was undisturbed, smooth and perfect, like no one had passed that way at all. I stopped, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. The figure ahead kept walking for a few more steps, then stopped and turned around. Finally, after all this time, he turned to face me. There was nothing under the red beanie. No face, no head, just empty space that somehow held the shape of a person. The blue jacket hung on a frame of absence, a hole in reality wearing clothes. And where I should have been, there was just white, the same white as the storm around us, like he was made from the blizzard itself. He raised an arm and pointed. Not at me, but past me, behind me. I turned and saw what he was showing me. Through a gap in the whiteout, just for a second, I could see where we were. We weren't on the trail. We were standing at the edge of a cliff, a sheer drop of several hundred feet down to the rocks below. One more step, and I would have walked right over. When I turned back, he was gone, just vanished into the white, leaving no trace he'd ever been there. But I could still hear the footsteps, receding now, moving away in a different direction. I collapsed in the snow, my mind trying to catch up with what I just seen. The phantom hiker. The urban legend I heard in coffee shops and bars, the story locals told to scare newcomers. A spectral figure that appears in storms, that leads people off the trail, that is seen just before hikers vanish. I laughed at those stories, dismissed them as small-town superstition. But he was real, and he'd been leading me to my death. The whiteout lasted another hour. I found a small depression in the rocks, curled up to preserve heat, and waited. When the storm finally broke, I could see the trail, 50 feet to my left. I'd been walking parallel to it, following the phantom toward the cliff edge. The descent was a nightmare of numb fingers and shaking legs, but I made it down just after dark. At the trailhead, there was a search and rescue truck, volunteers gearing up to come looking for me. They said 2 other hikers had been reported missing that afternoon, last seen heading up just before the whiteout hit. They found one of them the next day, frozen to death at the base of a cliff. The other was never found. I tried to tell the SAR team what I'd seen, about the man in the blue jacket with no face. They nodded politely, attributed it to altitude and stress, the mind playing tricks in survival situations. But I saw something in the eyes of the older volunteers, the ones who'd been hiking these mountains for decades. They believed me. They heard the stories too. I learned later that the phantom has been reported for years, always during sudden storms, always wearing the same blue jacket and red beanie. Some say he is the ghost of a hiker who died on the mountain in the 60s. Others say he is something older, something that was here before the trails, before the city, before people came to Alaska at all. A spirit of the mountain that collects the lost and unwary. What scares me most, ISN, is that I saw him. It is that I almost listened. I almost trusted him completely, almost followed him right over that edge. And I keep thinking about those moments when he vanished in the whiteout, those seconds when I couldn't see him. Was he checking to see if I was still following? Was he adjusting his route, looking for the perfect place to lead me off the cliff? I don't hike alone anymore. I don't hike flat top at all, actually. But sometimes, on days when storms roll in from the coast and the mountains disappear into cloud, I think about him up there, waiting in the white, patient and eternal, for the next person who I'll see a friendly figure on the trail and think they found help instead of death. And I wonder how many people are still up there with him. How many followed that blue jacket into the storm and never came back? How many saw that empty face in their final moments and understood, too late, that some guides don't lead you home. They lead you somewhere else entirely. Story 8. Watcher at Station 7, the shadow moved faster than anything human should move. And it had been following me for 3 days straight. My name is Mike Harris, and I work maintenance on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. 800 miles of steel carrying 2 million barrels of oil daily from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez. Most people see the pipeline from the highway and think it looks lonely. They have no idea. The real isolation happens at the pump stations, scattered every 50 miles across the most desolate landscape in North America. Places where you can go weeks without seeing another soul. I was stationed at Pump 7, 60 miles north of Fairbanks, when it started. November 5th, the darkness had already settled in for the long winter. Up here, the sun barely clears the horizon in November, giving maybe 3 hours of twilight before night takes over again. The rest is just endless black and snow and cold that turns your breath to ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. I was doing a routine inspection on the exterior sensors when I saw it. A shadow on the tundra, standing maybe 200 yards out. Human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, too thin, and perfectly still despite the wind that was howling hard enough to knock me sideways. I figured it was a caribou or my eyes playing tricks in the dim light. I went back inside, checked the monitors. The pipeline pressure looked good. Flow rates normal. Everything running smooth. I pulled up the exterior camera feeds. 6 cameras covering the perimeter. The shadow was visible on camera 3. Still standing in the same spot. Still motionless. I zoomed in. The image pixelated, but I could make out the basic shape. Definitely humanoid. Definitely not caribou. But there was something off about it. The shadow seemed darker than it should be. Like it was absorbing light instead of blocking it. And it had no detail. No features. No texture. Just a flat black silhouette against the white snow. I radioed Station 6, 40 miles south. Asked if they had anyone out on foot patrol. Negative. Station 8 reported the same. Nobody was supposed to be out there. The nearest town was Coldfoot, 30 miles west. And nobody from Coldfoot walked around the tundra in November. That was suicide. I watched the shadow for 2 hours. It never moved, never shifted, just stood there. Then, as the last bit of twilight faded, it was gone. Not walking away, not vanishing gradually, just gone between one frame and the next. I told myself it was equipment malfunction. Camera glitch. My shift ended at midnight. I tried to sleep, could not, kept thinking about that shadow, about how still it had been, how dark. I got up at 3 a.m. and checked the cameras again. It was back, closer now, maybe 100 yards from the station. Same position, same impossible stillness, but facing a different direction. Facing the station, facing me. My blood went cold. I cycled through all 6 cameras. The shadow was visible on 3 of them now. Always in the same relative position. Always facing the building. I put on my extreme weather gear. Grabbed a flashlight. Went outside. The cold hit me like a physical force. -40 with wind chill. The kind of cold that kills exposed skin in minutes. I swept my flashlight across the tundra. Nothing. Just empty snow stretching to the horizon. But I could feel it. That pressure. That sensation of being watched by something that should not exist. I walked a perimeter around the station. My flashlight beam caught something in the snow. Tracks. Not animal tracks. Not boot prints either. These were smooth depressions. Perfectly round. About 8 inches in diameter. Spaced 6 feet apart in a straight line. Leading from where the shadow had been standing directly to the station wall. Then stopping. The tracks were fresh. Made within the hour. I followed them back toward their origin. They started 200 yards out. Just appeared in the middle of the tundra. No trail leading to them. No indication where they came from. Just suddenly there, like whatever made them had dropped from the sky. I went back inside, locked the door. Not that locks meant anything out here. If something wanted in, the station was not built to keep it out. These places were designed to protect against weather and mechanical failure. Not intruders, especially not intruders that moved like shadows and left impossible tracks. I checked the company database. Searched for any reports from other stations about unusual sightings. Found nothing in official channels. But I knew the old-timers kept their own logs. Unofficial records of strange things that happened on the pipeline. Things management did not want documented. I called Eddie Chen at Station 3. He had been working the pipeline for 20 years. If anyone knew about weird shadow figures, it would be Eddie. He answered on the first ring. Asked if I was seeing them too. My stomach dropped. Eddie told me about the shadow people. That is what the workers called them. Entities that appeared around the isolated stations during the darkest months. Always humanoid, always watching, moving impossibly fast when they wanted to. Several workers had reported them over the years. Management dismissed it as isolation psychosis, cabin fever, the mind playing tricks in the endless dark. But Eddie said he knew better. He had seen them himself, 3 times over 20 years. Always in November or December. Always at the most remote stations. The shadows would appear, watch for days, then vanish. Most workers who saw them quit within a month. The ones who stayed learned to ignore them. Learned to pretend they were not there. Eddie said one rule was critical. Never go outside when they were close. Never confront them. Never try to interact. Because the few workers who did were never quite right afterward. They would come back inside changed. Quiet. Staring at nothing. Speaking in fragments. Within weeks they would request transfers. And they would never talk about what happened out there in the dark. I thanked Eddie. Hung up. Checked the cameras. The shadow had moved again. It was at the station wall now. Pressed against the metal. I could see it on camera too. Just a black shape. Featureless. But I swear I could feel its attention. Could feel it studying me through the walls. The lights flickered, then went out. Emergency backup kicked in. Red emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson. The monitors were still running. I pulled up the camera feeds. All 6 cameras showed the shadow. It had multiplied, or there were more of them. 6 shadows, 1 visible on each camera. All pressed against the station walls. All facing inward. The temperature inside dropped. I could see my breath. The heaters were running full blast, but the cold was seeping through. Not natural cold. This was something else. Something that came with the shadows. I grabbed my radio. Tried calling Station 6. Static. Station 8. Static. Station 3. Eddie. His voice came through broken and distorted. He was saying something about them getting inside. About how once they got close enough, the barriers stopped working. About how reality got thin when they pressed in. The radio died. I was alone. The monitor showed the shadows moving now. Sliding along the walls. Not walking. Sliding. Their movement was fluid. Wrong. Like they were not bound by normal physics. Like they existed slightly outside regular space. I heard scratching. Metal on metal. Coming from every direction. The shadows were testing the walls. Looking for entry points. The station was not airtight. Ventilation ducts. Cable conduits. Maintenance hatches. So many small gaps. So many ways in for something that was not quite solid. I backed into the control room. The smallest space. Fewest entry points. The scratching grew louder. more insistent. Then it stopped. The sudden silence was worse. I watched the monitors. The shadows were gone from the cameras. All 6 cameras showed empty tundra. Empty walls. Nothing. But I could feel them. Inside the station now. Moving through the spaces between spaces. Existing in gaps I could not perceive. The emergency lights began to flicker. In the strobing red light I saw movement. Quick, at the edge of my vision. Gone when I turned to look directly. My radio crackled to life. Eddie, his voice. Clear now. He said they were inside with me. Said I needed to stay calm. Stay still. Not run. Running triggered them. Made them chase. And when the shadow people chased, they caught you. Always. Eddie said to close my eyes. Count to 100. Let them satisfy their curiosity. Let them examine me. Fighting only made it worse. I closed my eyes, started counting, felt the temperature drop further, felt presence, multiple presences, surrounding me, close enough to touch. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. Something was breathing next to me. Not human breathing. Too slow, too rhythmic, like machinery, like something imitating the act of breathing without understanding its purpose. I felt touch, cold, gentle, exploring my face, my hands, my chest, fingers that were not quite fingers. Too many joints, too smooth. The touch left numbness behind. Areas of my skin that stopped sending signals. That went dead and empty. I kept counting. 70, 80, 90. The touches became more insistent, more invasive. Something was inside my head now. Not physically, but present, searching through my thoughts, my memories, looking for something. Understanding something. Learning. I reached 100. Opened my eyes. The control room was empty. The emergency lights had stopped flickering. The monitors showed normal exterior views. Nothing on the tundra. Nothing at the walls. Just snow and darkness and the endless pipeline stretching to the horizon. But I was changed. I could feel it. Parts of my mind were different. Rearranged. There were memories that felt wrong. Moments from my past that seemed edited. Altered. Like the shadows had rewritten small pieces of my history. Nothing major. Just details. But enough to make me question what was real. I checked my hands. The areas they had touched were still numb. I could see the skin but felt nothing. Like those parts of me belonged to someone else now. Or something else. The sun rose 3 hours later. Weak twilight, but enough to push back the complete darkness. I did my morning checks. Everything normal. Pipeline running smooth. No evidence of the night. Its events. Except the numbness, and the wrongness in my head. And the knowledge that I was not alone out here. Had never been alone. I requested a transfer the next day. Management approved it immediately. Too immediately. Like they expected it. Like they had a system for workers who encountered the shadow people. Quiet transfers. No questions asked. No official reports filed. I am stationed at Pump 12 now. South of Fairbanks. Closer to civilization. Less isolated. But I still see them sometimes. At the edge of my vision. In reflections. Quick movements in the corner of monitors. The shadows followed me. Or maybe they are everywhere on the pipeline. Maybe every isolated station has them. Watching. Waiting. Studying us. The numbness in my hands has spread. Up my arms now. Across my chest. The doctors find nothing wrong. No nerve damage. No medical explanation. But I know what it is. The shadows left something behind. Part of themselves. Growing inside me. Slowly replacing pieces of who I was with something else. I wake up sometimes and do not recognize my reflection. The face is mine but the expression is wrong. The eyes look but do not see the way I remember seeing. And I catch myself standing perfectly still. For minutes. For hours. Not moving. Not thinking. Just existing in stillness like the shadows on the tundra. I think they are preparing me for something. Converting me slowly. Until the day I walk out into the darkness and do not come back. Until I become one of them. Another shadow on the endless snow. Another watcher at the isolated stations. Warning the next worker. The next victim. The next conversion. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline stretches 800 miles through some of the most remote territory on Earth. And in the darkness between the stations, the shadow people wait. They have always waited. They will always wait. Patient. Inevitable. Hungry for something we have that they need. And one day, we all feed the darkness. One way or another. Story 9. Frozen plague. The virus was still alive when they pulled it from the permafrost in 1997. 79 years after it killed almost everyone in the village. I am Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a virologist from Johns Hopkins, and I need to tell you what really happened in Brevig Mission, Alaska. Not the sanitized version you find in medical journals. Not the official story about scientific research and pandemic preparedness. The truth, the part they made us sign NDAs to keep quiet. The part that still wakes me up screaming in the middle of the night. Brevik Mission is a tiny Inupiat village on the Seward Peninsula, population around 400 today. In November 1918, it had 80 residents. By November 23rd, 72 of them were dead. 5 days. That is all it took for the Spanish flu to wipe out 90% of an entire community. The bodies were buried in a mass grave, dug deep into the permafrost by the 8 survivors and a few people from neighboring villages who'd come to help. The permafrost preserved everything. The bodies, the clothes, and the virus itself, frozen in lung tissue, suspended in time, waiting. In 1997, a research team led by Dr. Johan Hulten exhumed the mass grave. They wanted tissue samples to study the 1918 flu strain, to understand what made it so deadly, to prepare for future pandemics. I was a graduate student then, 26 years old, eager to make my mark. When I got the call asking if I wanted to join the expedition, I didn't hesitate. We arrived in Brevik Mission in late August. The village elders had given permission for the exhumation, but you could tell they weren't happy about it. They knew the stories. Their grandparents had survived the pandemic, had watched their families die in horrible ways, had buried bodies in that frozen ground and prayed they stay buried. One elder, a man named Thomas talked to, pulled me aside the night before we started digging. He was in his 70s, sharp-eyed and serious. He told me his grandmother had been one of the survivors. She'd been 12 years old in 1918. She watched her parents, her siblings, her friends all die within days of each other. Watched them cough up blood. Watched their skin turn purple-black. Watched them drown in their own lungs. But she also told him something else. Something the researchers didn't know. In those final days, when the dying outnumbered the living, strange things had happened. People who'd been dead for hours would sit up suddenly, would open their eyes, would try to speak. Their words made no sense, just garbled sounds, like their mouths had forgotten how to form language. Then they fall back, truly dead this time. The survivors had been terrified. They buried the bodies as fast as they could, dug that grave 8 feet deep, piled rocks on top, tried to make sure nothing could get out. Thomas said his grandmother believed something had been in that village with the flu, something that fed on death, that tried to use the dying as vessels. The permafrost had trapped it along with the bodies, and his grandmother had made him promise to never let anyone disturb that grave. I smiled politely and thanked him for sharing the story, chalked it up to trauma and folklore and the way cultures process mass tragedy. I didn't believe in spirits or curses or anything that couldn't be measured in a lab. I should have listened to him. We started excavating on August 19th. The permafrost was hard as concrete, even in summer. We used picks and shovels, working carefully to avoid damaging the remains. 6 feet down, we found the first body. A woman, frozen in a fetal position, her face preserved in an expression of agony. Her lungs were intact, perfect for sampling. Dr. Hulten collected tissue with surgical precision. We placed the samples in liquid nitrogen, sealed them in containers, labeled everything. By the end of the first day, we had material from 3 bodies. Enough for years of research. We should have stopped there, should have filled in the grave and left. But the team leader wanted more samples, wanted to be thorough, wanted to make sure we didn't have to come back. On the second day, we went deeper, 7 feet down, 8 feet down. The bodies were packed tight here, layered on top of each other. We found children, teenagers, young adults, all frozen in their death poses, all still showing the dark lesions and blood-stained mouths that marked the hemorrhagic pneumonia that had killed them. That's when I noticed something strange. The bodies at the bottom of the grave, the ones that had been buried first, looked different. Their eyes were open, all of them, every single one, staring up at nothing with frost-covered pupils. Their mouths were open too, wider than seemed natural, like they'd been screaming when they froze. I mentioned it to Dr. Hulten. He said it was probably just the position they'd been placed in. Rigor mortis, normal post-mortem changes, but it bothered me, because their hands were different too, clenched into fists, nails dug into their own palms deep enough to draw blood, like they'd been in pain, like they'd been fighting something. We took samples from one of them, a young man, maybe 20 years old. The tissue came away easily, still frozen solid after nearly 8 decades. As we lifted it out, I swear I felt something, a vibration, a pulse of something that felt like static electricity but wronger. It made my teeth ache, made my vision blur for a second, then it passed. and I convinced myself I imagined it. We finished the excavation by mid-afternoon on the third day, filled in the grave, marked it with a memorial plaque, thanked the village elders, packed up our samples and equipment. By evening, we were back in Nome, staying at a research facility while we waited for our flight back to the mainland. That night, I had the first dream. I was in Brevig Mission in 1918. I could see the village clearly, small wooden houses clustered against the frozen landscape. People were dying. I watched them cough and bleed and struggle for breath, watched the life drain from their eyes. But then, just before they died completely, something else would look out through those eyes. Something ancient and hungry and not remotely human. It was using them, trying to stay in our world, using the dying as anchors. But the flu killed too fast. The bodies failed before it could fully take hold. So it got trapped, frozen in the permafrost with its failed hosts, waiting for someone to dig it up, to thaw it out, to give it another chance. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Told myself it was just stress, just the intensity of the work, just Thomas, this story getting into my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we brought something back from that grave besides tissue samples. The feeling got worse over the next week. We flew back to Johns Hopkins with our samples, started the analysis. The virus was incredibly well preserved, still viable. We could culture it, study it. The research potential was enormous. But people started getting sick, not with the flu, with something else, something that didn't show up on any tests. They'd complain about feeling watched, about hearing whispers when no one was around, about dreams of drowning, of suffocating, of something trying to crawl inside them. 3 researchers quit within 2 weeks, just walked out and never came back. One of them called me from somewhere in Montana a month later. She was terrified, barely coherent, said something had followed her from the lab, something that wanted in. She could feel it pressing against her thoughts, trying to find a way through. Then the line went dead, and I never heard from her again. I started having more dreams. Every night now, always the same. I was in Brevig Mission, watching people die, watching something try to use their bodies, feeling it rage when the permafrost trapped it. And now, in the dreams, it could see me, could see all of us who disturbed the grave. It was using the virus as a bridge, the samples we'd taken, the tissue we cultured, the living, breathing cells that connected 1918 to now. It was trying to come through. 1 month after we returned, Dr. Hulton collapsed in the lab. Massive seizure. When he came to, he couldn't remember the previous week. Couldn't remember where he'd been or what he'd been working on. His personality had changed. He was quieter, more withdrawn. His eyes had this distant look, like he was watching something no one else could see. They pulled him from the project, put him on medical leave. I visited him once at his house. He stared at me without recognition for a long moment, then suddenly grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. He told me we had to destroy the samples, burn everything, salt the ground where we dug, go back to Brevig Mission and seal that grave with concrete, because we let something out, something that had been trapped for 79 years, something that remembered being alive and wanted to be alive again and would use whatever it could to claw its way back into our world. Then his eyes went distant again, and he released me, asked who I was, asked why I was in his house. I left and never went back. I tried to warn the others, tried to explain what was happening. They thought I was having a breakdown. Stress-induced psychosis. They removed me from the project too, recommended therapy, suggested medication, made it clear that if I kept talking about curses and spirits and things trying to use the virus as a gateway, my career would be over. So I stopped talking, but I didn't stop watching. Over the next year, 7 more people involved in the project died or disappeared. Heart attacks, strokes, car accidents, suicide, each one just unusual enough to be tragic but not suspicious. Each one removing someone who had been in that grave, who handled those samples, who had given the thing a path back. I'm telling this now because I don't have much time left. I can feel it, the pressure in my head, the whispers that aren't quite words, the dreams that are getting stronger, more real. It's been working on me for years, trying to find a weakness, trying to slip through. Last night, I lost an hour. Can't remember where I was or what I did. Found mud on my shoes, dirt under my nails, the kind of frozen dirt you only find in permafrost. The last researcher from that expedition still alive, still fighting. When I go, there'll be no one left who knows the truth. No one who remembers what we really found in Brevig Mission. The official story will stand. Important research, scientific breakthrough, pandemic preparedness. But the truth is we opened something that should have stayed closed. Woke something that should have stayed frozen. Gave it exactly what it needed to try again. The samples are still there. In secure storage at Johns Hopkins. Still alive. Still waiting. They tried to have them destroyed. But I don't have access anymore. Don't have authority. I am just a disgraced researcher with a history of mental health issues. No one listens to warnings from someone like me. So I am leaving this account, this confession, this warning. If you, rereading this, if you, rehearing this, understand that some things shouldn't to be disturbed. Some graves should stay sealed. Some viruses carry more than disease. They carry memories, remnants, echoes of things that shouldn't to exist. The mass grave in Breivik mission should never have been opened. What we found there wasn't just the Spanish flu. It was something older, something that had ridden the pandemic like a wave, trying to establish itself in our world, failing only because the permafrost froze it before it could finish. We gave it a second chance, and it is not done trying. Story 10. Last transmission. I never believed in curses until I listened to the audio recording that should not exist. My name is Marcus Webb, and I am a freelance investigative journalist specializing in cold cases. 3 months ago, I received an unmarked package at my Denver apartment. No return address, no note, just a weathered cardboard box containing a single cassette tape labeled Boggs' Final Words, October 16, 1972, and a faded photograph of a Cessna 310 sitting on an Anchorage runway. I should explain something first. On October 16, 1972, House Majority Leader Hale Boggs boarded a small plane in Anchorage, Alaska, heading to Juneau for a campaign event. With him were Congressman Mick Begich, their aide Russell Brown, and pilot Don Johns. They never arrived. The plane vanished somewhere over the vast Alaskan wilderness, swallowed by mountains and ice. Despite the largest search and rescue operation in American history at that time, involving 40 military aircraft, 50 civilian planes, and over 3,000 hours of flight time, not a single piece of wreckage was ever found. No debris, no bodies, nothing. The disappearance became the foundation of what locals call the Alaska Triangle, a region roughly between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik where more than 16,000 people have vanished since 1988. Twice as many disappearances per capita as the Bermuda Triangle. But unlike Bermuda, Alaska has a rational explanation ready-made. Brutal weather, treacherous terrain, countless ways to die in the wilderness. Everyone accepts this. Everyone moves on. Until you hear the tape. I own vintage audio equipment for restoration work, so playing the cassette was easy enough. I set it up in my home office, pressed play, and heard static. Thick, crackling static that lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then a voice emerged, distant and distorted, like someone speaking through layers of water. This is November 1812 Hotel calling any station. We are experiencing instrument failure. Altimeter reading negative 3,000 feet. Compass spinning. That is impossible. We should be over Portage Pass, but there is nothing below us. Just gray, dense gray in every direction. The voice belonged to Don Johns, the pilot. I recognized it from the archived interviews with his family I had studied years ago while writing a piece on unsolved aviation mysteries. But this recording contradicted everything in the official file. According to the final report, no distress call was ever received. The plane simply dropped off radar 17 minutes after takeoff and was never heard from again. I listened to the entire tape 4 times that first night. Each listen revealed new details hidden in the static. Breathing that did not match the rhythm of the speaker. A low humming that rose and fell like a mechanical heartbeat. And underneath it all, something that sounded almost like whispering, though I could never make out actual words. The tape ran 8 minutes and 43 seconds. In that time, Johns described impossible things. The instruments showing the plane simultaneously climbing and descending. The GPS reading coordinates that placed them over the Pacific Ocean, then the Arctic, then back over Anchorage, all within seconds. The windows showing only that endless gray void, no sky, no ground, no horizon. And then, in the final 2 minutes, his voice changed. The professional pilot, his calm cracked into something raw and terrified. There is something out there in the gray. I can see shapes moving. Large shapes. They be not clouds. They re-solid. They recircling us. Congressman Boggs is asking me to climb, but the controls are in to responding. We're being pulled. I can feel it, like invisible hands on the fuselage. The others see it too now. Russell is praying. Nick is writing something down. Boggs keeps saying we need to document this. He is right. Someone needs to know. The shapes are getting closer. They look like aircraft, but they're wrong. The proportions are all wrong. No wings where wings should be. Lights in patterns that make my eyes hurt to look at. The radio is picking up voices, but they not speaking English. Not speaking anything. It's just sound that feels like language. My head is pounding. The gray is pressing against the windows now. Like it wants in. Like it's alive. Oh God, it is inside the cabin. I can see it coming through the walls. Not breaking through, just passing through. Solid matter means nothing to it. It's reaching for the controls. For me, I'm going to stop the tape now and hide it. If someone finds this, tell my wife I love her. Tell her I tried to bring us home. Tell her the Alaska Triangle is real and it's not natural and it's still hungry and it will take more and more and more. And the tape ended with a sound like metal tearing and a sudden, absolute silence. I sat in my office until dawn, staring at the cassette player, trying to rationalize what I had heard. A hoax seemed obvious, except the voice was undeniably John's. I had listened to enough authenticated recordings of him to know his speech patterns. His accent, the slight whistle on his S sounds from a chipped tooth. This was him, or an impossibly perfect imitation. The photograph troubled me more than the tape. I am no expert, but the image quality, the color saturation, the grain pattern, all matched 1970s era film stock. The plane, S registration number, N1812H, was clearly visible on the fuselage. I verified it against FAA records. That was indeed the Cessna that vanished. But the photograph showed something in the background, barely visible behind the plane, his tail. A figure, human-shaped but proportioned wrong. Too tall, arms too long, standing at the edge of the tarmac, watching. I spent the next week trying to authenticate the tape. I sent a digital copy to an audio forensics expert I knew from a previous story. Her analysis came back inconclusive. The magnetic signature was consistent with 1970s technology. The tape showed appropriate age-related degradation, but there were anomalies in the audio that her software could not classify. Frequencies that should not exist on analog tape. Patterns in the static that almost resembled data encryption, decades before such technology was widely available. I contacted the families. Begich, his son, now a senator himself, refused to speak with me. Boggs, S. daughter, former Congresswoman Cokie Roberts, had passed away, but her assistant returned my email with a terse message. The family has nothing to say about conspiracy theories. John's widow was in a nursing home, suffering from advanced dementia. Only Russell Brown, his brother, agreed to meet. We talked in a diner outside Fairbanks. He was in his 70s, weathered and tired looking. When I mentioned the tape, his coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "It arrived at my apartment. No sender information." He set down the cup. His hand was shaking. "My brother told me something before he got on that plane," he said quietly. "He called me the night before. Late. Said he had a bad feeling. Said Boggs had been acting strange for days. Obsessed with some local stories he had heard. Tales about aircraft vanishing. About the Tlingit people warning that the land itself was alive and took what it wanted. Russell thought it was just campaign stress. He almost didn't to go. But Boggs insisted they needed everyone there. Now I wonder if Boggs knew something. If he was looking for it. Looking for what? Whatever took them. He pushed an envelope across the table. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten letter, dated October 14th, 1972. Russell Brown, his handwriting. It read, "If something happens to us in Alaska, look at the maps. Look at where planes have vanished. It makes a pattern." Boggs showed me. He has been collecting data for months. Dozens of disappearances all in the same area. He thinks there's something there. Something that hides in the storms and the clouds. Something old. He wants to see it. He is convinced if we fly the right route at the right time, we'll all encounter it. I think he has lost his mind. But I've been going anyway. Someone has to keep him safe. I felt my blood go cold. He was looking for it, I said. Boggs deliberately flew into the Alaska Triangle. Russell, his brother, nodded slowly. My brother died because a powerful man wanted to prove something impossible. And the worst part, I think he did prove it. I think they found exactly what they were looking for. And it found them back. I flew to Anchorage the next day. The Alaska Triangle is not a mystery to locals. It is a fact of life. They lose hunters, hikers, small aircraft, fishing boats. The wilderness is unforgiving. The weather turns deadly without warning. People make mistakes. That is the accepted wisdom. But spend time in the bars around Merrill Field Airport, buy enough drinks, and you hear different stories. The bush pilot who saw his instruments go haywire over the Chugach Mountains and felt his plane pulled sideways by invisible force before he managed to break free. The fisherman whose GPS showed him circling the same coordinates for hours while his eyes told him he was moving in a straight line. The search and rescue coordinator who stopped counting how many crash sites they never found, even with perfect weather and known last positions. I interviewed 12 people over 4 days. 9 refused to go on record. The 3 who agreed all described the same phenomenon. A feeling of wrongness that descended without warning. A sense of being watched by something vast. Instruments failing in ways that made no engineering sense. And always, that gray. That thick, formless gray that swallowed everything. On my 5th day, I met someone who changed everything. Her name was Sarah Coagley, a Ina elder who worked with the state's Aviation Safety Board. She invited me to her home in Anchorage, served me salmon and tea, and listened while I explained my investigation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. The land has been taking people since before your government existed, she finally said. We have stories going back hundreds of years. Hunters who walked into the mountains and never returned. Kayakers swallowed by calm water. Entire camps that vanished overnight. We learned not to go to certain places. Not to fly certain routes. Not to be out when the sky turns that particular shade of gray. Your Congressman Boggs asked me questions before his flight. He wanted to know about the old stories. I told him to respect the land. To respect what he didn't. To understand. He said understanding was exactly what he intended to achieve. I told him some things do want to be understood. Some things take offense at being studied. Do you think something killed them deliberately? I asked. I think something protects itself. Your people see empty wilderness and think it's yours to explore, to conquer, to explain. But it's not empty. It never was, and some parts of it remember when humans knew to stay away. She walked to a cabinet and pulled out a rolled map. She spread it on her kitchen table. It showed Alaska with dozens of red dots marking disappearances. They formed a rough triangular pattern, just like the letter said. But there was more. At the center of the triangle, she had drawn something in pencil. A spiral. Every disappearance, when you track the last known positions, they curve inward, she said. Like water circling a drain, all spiraling toward this point. She tapped the map. The location was deep in the Chugach Mountains, miles from any road or settlement. What was there? I asked. Nothing anyone has ever come back from. I knew what I had to do. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was insane. But the journalist in me, the part that chased stories into dark places, knew I had to see for myself. I hired a bush pilot named Tom McKenzie, a grizzled man in his 60s who had flown Alaskan wilderness for 40 years. I told him I wanted to fly over the Chugach to see the area where Boggs vanished. He quoted me a price, then doubled it when I showed him the exact coordinates Sarah had marked. This bad country, he said. Weather turns on a dime. A lot of downdrafts. Lost a friend out there back in '89. I need to see it, I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Your funeral. We flew out on a clear morning, the kind of crystalline autumn day where you can see forever. Tom, a Cessna, ironically the same model Boggs had flown in, climbed smoothly over Anchorage and headed northeast. Below us, the landscape transformed from city to wilderness in minutes. Mountains thrust up like broken teeth, their peaks dusted with early snow. Valleys carved by ancient glaciers stretched between them, filled with shadows. Tom kept up a steady commentary, pointing out landmarks, explaining weather patterns, telling stories about close calls and lucky breaks. I barely heard him. I was watching the GPS, watching us spiral slowly inward toward the coordinates. The change happened gradually. The sky began to lose its clarity. Not clouds forming, but a dimming, like someone slowly turning down a light. The mountains below became indistinct. Tom noticed it too. I saw him frown at his instruments. That is odd, he muttered. Barometer is jumping around. Compass is sluggish. Can you keep going? I asked. He shot me a look. Can and should are different questions. But he kept flying. The dimming increased. Within 10 minutes, the bright morning had become twilight gray. The mountains vanished below us. I looked out my window and saw exactly what Don Johns had described. That endless, formless gray. No sky above, no ground below, just gray in every direction. Tom, I said, Tom, look at the altimeter. He did. Then he grabbed the controls tighter. That is impossible. That is showing we at negative altitude. We have to be underground. The GPS had stopped updating. The last coordinate it showed was exactly the center point Sarah had marked. We need to turn back, Tom said. His professional comm was cracking. We need to turn back right now. He banked the plane hard. Or tried to. The Cessna responded. But when he leveled out, we were heading the same direction as before. He tried again. Same result. It was as if the plane was locked on invisible rails. What the hell? Tom breathed. That's when I heard it. A sound coming through the headset, underneath Tom. This breathing and the engine noise. A low humming, rising and falling. The same sound from the tape. Do you hear that? I asked. Hear what? The humming was growing louder. And now I could hear something else. Whispering. Multiple voices speaking in synchronization. Forming words that were almost but not quite English. My head began to pound. Tom was fighting the controls now, his face pale. Something is pulling us. I can feel it on the stick, like flying through molasses. The gray outside my window shifted. Shapes moved within it, large shapes, circling. Everything Don Johns had described was happening to us. I fumbled for my phone, started recording audio. If we vanished like bogs, maybe someone would find this. Maybe the pattern would finally be clear. The shapes came closer. They did look like aircraft, but wrong. Proportions that hurt to perceive. Lights in patterns that seemed to pulse directly into my brain. Tom was shouting now, yanking the controls, but we continued our slow spiral inward. The gray pressed against the windows. I could see it moving, flowing, as if it had substance. As if it was alive. And then I understood this wasn't a place. This was a thing. A vast, ancient thing that existed in the spaces between normal reality. The Alaska Triangle wasn't a location. It was the feeding ground of something that had been here long before humans arrived. Something that reached up from those hidden spaces and pulled down anything that came too close. Planes, boats, people. All of them spiraling inward to be absorbed, to be consumed by whatever dwelled at the center. Boggs had known, or suspected, that's why he flew that route. He wanted proof. He got it. The gray began seeping into the cabin. I watched it pour through the solid metal of the fuselage like water through cloth. Tom screamed. The controls went dead. The engine sound changed, becoming deeper, slower, wrong. I kept recording, kept talking into my phone, describing what I saw, what was happening to us, knowing it probably wouldn't matter, knowing we would vanish just like Boggs, just like all the others, adding 2 more red dots to Sarah, a spiral map. The gray surrounded me now. It was cold, so cold. I could feel it pulling at me, trying to separate me from reality, to drag me into whatever space it occupied. But I was wrong about one thing. We didn't vanish. Tom managed to break free. I don't know how. Maybe we weren't deep enough in. Maybe the thing hadn't fully grasped us yet. But suddenly the controls responded. He threw the plane into a dive. The gray receded. Light returned. Mountains appeared below us, blessed and solid and real. We landed at Merrill Field 30 minutes later. Tom, his hands shook so badly he could barely shut down the engine. We sat in silence for a long time. We don't talk about this. He finally said, we never talk about this. I have to write about it. I said, people need to know. He looked at me with something like pity. Who is going to believe you? He was right, of course. I wrote the story, submitted it to every major publication I could think of. They all passed. Too crazy, too unverifiable. The few editors who responded suggested I seek professional help. The tape disappeared from my apartment a week later. Stolen, though there was no sign of forced entry. The photograph vanished too. All my digital backups corrupted simultaneously, files showing only gray static when I tried to open them. I still have the recording from my phone. 8 minutes and 12 seconds of audio showing our instruments failing. Tom, his voice rising in panic. The humming and whispering growing louder. And underneath it all, if you listen very carefully with good headphones, you can hear something else. Words in that almost language. I played it for linguists, for audio experts, for anyone who will listen. One linguist, who studied indigenous Alaskan languages, went pale when she heard it. It's not exactly language, she said. That is something pretending to be language. mimicking the structure, like a mockingbird imitating human speech. It is close enough to be recognizable, but wrong in ways I can quite define. Whatever made this sound is not human, has never been human. I think about Boggs a lot now, about what he experienced in those final minutes. Did he understand what was happening? Did he realize they were being hunted by something that existed outside normal space and time? Did he feel vindicated that he had found proof of the impossible, even as that proof consumed him? The Alaska Triangle is still hungry. Disappearances continue, 16,000 people since 1988. And those are just the official numbers. How many more walked into the wilderness and were never reported missing? How many small planes vanished with no one to note their absence? And here is what keeps me awake at night. I looked at disappearance patterns in other parts of the world. Remote areas with high numbers of unexplained vanishings. The Nevada Triangle, the Michigan Triangle, the Bennington Triangle in Vermont. Areas where the U.S. Geological Survey has noted magnetic anomalies and instrument disturbances. They all show the same spiral pattern, the same inward curve to a central point, which means the thing in Alaska is not unique. There are more of them, scattered across the world, ancient, patient, and endlessly hungry, waiting for us to fly too close, to walk too far, to investigate too deeply. I received another unmarked package yesterday. Different location, different tape, but the same desperate voice of a pilot describing instruments failing and gray pressing in and shapes circling. This one from 1978. A cargo plane that vanished over Nevada. The photograph with it shows the plane on a runway. And in the background, barely visible, that same too tall figure with arms too long. Watching, waiting, I am going to investigate. I know I shouldn't. I know the rational thing would be to destroy this tape and forget everything. But I am a journalist. I chase stories. And this story has been happening for decades, maybe centuries, and no one is listening. So I'll keep investigating, keep collecting evidence, keep trying to warn people, and maybe one day I'll spiral too close to the center. Maybe I'll end up another red dot on this map. Another voice on a tape that shouldn't exist, describing the impossible as it consumes me. But at least I'll know the truth. At least I'll understand what Hale Boggs understood in his final moments. That we are not alone in this world. That the empty places are not empty. And that something vast and ancient and patient watches from the gray spaces between reality, waiting for us to make the mistake of looking back. The Alaska Triangle took a congressman and his companions 53 years ago. It is still taking people today. And it will keep taking them until someone finally believes. Until someone finally understands. Until someone finally stops it. But I don't think anyone can. I think we've always been prey. We just didn't, the hunter was real. And now the snow closes in, the path gone behind us. If you felt the cold tonight, subscribe and turn on notifications. More stories are waiting just beyond the tree line. Drop your own strange experiences or your location in the comments. It's how we keep the whispers alive. Midnight Whispers isn't just a story. It's a thread in the dark that connects us. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your back to the wind.